Some stories should never be told, some secrets should never be revealed, but what happened in this isolated chalet in the heart of the mountain defies all human logic. The Moreau family thought they had found the perfect refuge to escape the snowstorm that was hitting the region. Marc Moreau, his wife Claire and their 2 children, Emma aged 14 and Lucas 10 years old, had been driving for hours on the snowy roads of the French Alps. The blizzard that was intensifying made driving increasingly dangerous, and visibility was reduced to a few meters. That's when they spotted the warm lights of the chalet glowing faintly through the curtain of snow. Marc hastily parked the car in front of this wooden construction that seemed to emerge from nowhere. The chalet looked strangely familiar, as if it had existed for centuries, with its ancient beams and windows with carved shutters. The family rushed inside to escape the wind gusts that were howling outside. The interior of the chalet was surprisingly warm and comfortable, with a large stone fireplace already crackling. The walls were adorned with hunting trophies and old yellowed photographs whose faces seemed to be watching them. Claire immediately noticed the strange atmosphere that reigned in the place, a troubling feeling of déjà vu. The children quickly explored the premises, discovering ancient objects scattered here and there, as if the previous occupants had left the place urgently. Emma found an old vintage radio in a corner of the living room, its brass buttons tarnished by time. She turned it on, and immediately crackling filled the room. Marc lit a fire in the fireplace while Claire prepared a meal with the provisions they had brought. The storm was raging outside, shaking the windows and making the chalet's structure creak. As the evening progressed, the family began to relax, believing themselves safe in this providential refuge. But it was when night fell completely that the strange phenomena began to manifest. The radio began to pick up distant voices speaking in an unknown language, guttural and disturbing. The words resonated hypnotically, creating a sinister melody that seemed to come from another world. Emma, fascinated by these sounds, turned up the volume to better hear these mysterious whispers. The voices seemed to be conversing with each other, sometimes laughing with a crystalline and icy laugh. Marc asked his daughter to turn off the radio, but she refused, claiming that the voices were speaking directly to her. Claire began to feel a growing unease as she observed her daughter's strange behavior. The temperature in the chalet seemed to drop suddenly, despite the fire burning intensely. The shadows cast by the flames danced on the walls abnormally, creating disturbing shapes. Lucas, the youngest, began to cry for no apparent reason, claiming to see silhouettes moving in the dark corners. It was at this precise moment that Marc realized the chalet was much older than he had initially thought. Carefully examining the ceiling beams, he discovered inscriptions carved into the wood, symbols that resembled no known alphabet. The marks seemed to have been sculpted with primitive tools, dating from an era well before modern construction. On the walls, cave paintings appeared under the peeling paint, representing half-human, half-animal creatures. These representations evoked ancestral rituals practiced by vanished civilizations. Claire discovered prehistoric objects in a drawer, flint arrowheads, carved bones, and stone amulets. The evidence was troubling. This chalet had been built on a sacred site used by the region's first inhabitants. The voices on the radio became clearer and clearer, and Emma began to understand certain words. They spoke of ancient guardians, spirits linked to the mountain for millennia. The little girl instinctively translated their words, as if she had always known this forgotten language. Marc tried to unplug the radio, but the device continued to work without electricity. The voices were now laughing openly, mocking the family's desperate attempts. Outside, the storm seemed to calm, but strange noises replaced the howling of the wind. Heavy footsteps echoed around the chalet, accompanied by scratching on the exterior walls. Claire looked out the window and saw indistinct forms moving in the snow. These creatures seemed bipedal, but their gait was jerky, primitive. Their glowing eyes reflected the chalet's light in the darkness. Marc barricaded the front door with furniture, but the scratching intensified. The children huddled against their mother, terrified by the inhuman sounds surrounding their refuge. Emma continued to listen to the radio, now completely hypnotized by the voices. She began to draw on the floor with a piece of charcoal, reproducing the symbols she heard being described. These drawings formed a complex ritual circle, identical to those discovered in prehistoric caves. Suddenly, the fire in the fireplace went out completely, plunging the family into total darkness. Only the greenish glow of the radio faintly illuminated the room. The voices then became perfectly audible, speaking in French with an archaic accent. "You are in our domain," they said in chorus, "you have desecrated our sanctuary." Marc turned on a flashlight and discovered with horror that the chalet's walls had transformed. In place of the modern wood, rocky walls covered with cave paintings surrounded them. The chalet had become a prehistoric cave, recreated by supernatural forces. The hunting trophies on the walls were now skulls of mixed animals and humans. Claire screamed upon discovering that the floor was littered with ancient bones whitened by centuries. The children cried, not understanding how their refuge had transformed into a cursed cavern. Emma, still under the influence of the voices, began to chant in the ancient language. Her words resonated strangely, creating a supernatural echo in the cave. With each syllable she pronounced, the cave paintings moved slightly. The drawn creatures seemed to move on the walls, their eyes following the family's movements. Marc tried to silence his daughter, but she pushed him away with superhuman strength. The ancient guardians were taking possession of Emma's mind, using her body as a medium. The voices explained that the chalet had been built on their sacred territory without permission. For centuries, they had been waiting for the opportunity to take back what belonged to them. Every family that had taken refuge in this chalet had met the same terrible fate. The bones on the floor were the remains of all the previous occupants. Claire discovered with horror modern clothing mixed with the ancient bones. A digital watch, eyeglasses, contemporary jewelry proved that other families had been trapped here. The chalet's history was a lie. It was only a lure created by the spirits to attract victims. Marc realized they had fallen into a millennial trap set by prehistoric entities. The scratching outside intensified, and the front door began to give way. Primitive silhouettes appeared in the doorway, their bodies covered with animal skins. These creatures were the physical guardians of the sanctuary, hybrid beings between man and beast. Their faces were deformed by centuries of mutation, a mixture of human and animal features. They carried primitive weapons, bone spears, stone axes, flint knives. Emma stood up and walked toward them, welcomed like a priestess by these entities. The guardians bowed before her, recognizing the ancient spirit that now inhabited her body. Claire tried to get her daughter back, but the creatures violently pushed her away. Marc understood that Emma was lost, transformed into a servant of the ancestral spirits. The voices on the radio explained the ritual that would follow. The family had to be sacrificed to nourish the spirits and maintain their power. Their souls would join the hundreds of other victims trapped in this cursed place. Lucas, in a burst of courage, tried to escape through a window. But the guardians caught him immediately, his piercing cries echoing in the cave. The creatures dragged him toward a stone altar that had appeared in the center of the room. This altar was covered with bloody symbols and traces of previous sacrifices. Channels were carved into the stone to let the victim's blood flow. Emma, completely possessed, began to prepare the sacrificial ritual. She placed bones in a circle around the altar, following a precise pattern. The guardians tied Lucas to the altar while his parents pleaded in vain. Claire and Marc were immobilized by other creatures, forced to witness the sacrifice. Emma raised a flint knife above her brother, her eyes shining with an inhuman glow. The voices were now chanting a hypnotic melody, preparing the offering. It was at this crucial moment that Marc realized something important. The spirits drew their power from the fear and despair of their victims. If the family stopped being afraid, perhaps they could break the spell. Marc began to recite Christian prayers, defying the pagan entities. His strong and determined voice resonated in the cave, disturbing the ritual. The guardians hesitated, surprised by this unexpected spiritual resistance. Claire understood her husband's intention and joined him, praying with fervor. Their united voices created a spiritual barrier that weakened the ancient spirits. Emma wavered, fighting against the grip of the entities controlling her. For a moment, her eyes became normal again, and she recognized her family. "Help me," she whispered before being possessed again. Marc broke his bonds and rushed toward his daughter, trying to free her. He tore the knife from her hands and threw it away, breaking the ritual circle. The guardians let out cries of rage, their power rapidly diminishing. Claire freed Lucas from the altar while the creatures slowly disintegrated. The spirits in the radio screamed with anger, their plan having failed. The cave began to transform again, slowly becoming a normal chalet again. The cave paintings faded, replaced by the original wooden walls. The bones disappeared, leaving room for the modern floor. Emma collapsed, freed from the grip of the ancestral entities. The family embraced, shaken by this traumatic experience. The radio became silent, its malevolent voices having disappeared. Outside, the storm had calmed, leaving place to a soothing silence. Marc cautiously opened the door and discovered a normal landscape covered with fresh snow. Their car was still there, intact, as if nothing had happened. The family hastily left the chalet, not turning back once. Driving toward the valley, they saw the chalet fading in the morning mist. Claire noticed that the construction seemed different now, older and more dilapidated. Marc accelerated, eager to get away from this cursed place as quickly as possible. In the rearview mirror, Emma saw the chalet disappear completely, as if it had never existed. The family reached the nearest town at sunrise, relieved to be safe. They immediately went to the police station to report their misadventure. The officers listened to their story with skepticism, classifying it as collective hallucination. According to the official maps, no chalet existed at the location they described. Research in the archives revealed no trace of construction in that area. The officer explained that this region was considered sacred by ancient tribes. No habitation had ever been authorized on this territory. The family understood they had been victims of a supernatural phenomenon impossible to explain. They decided never to speak of this experience to anyone again, but the psychological aftereffects of this night remained present for years. Emma developed a phobia of old radios and static noises. Lucas had recurring nightmares involving prehistoric creatures. Claire could no longer stand total silence, always keeping a television on. Marc carefully avoided mountains and isolated places. For months, they consulted psychologists to overcome their trauma, but no therapist could explain the synchronicity of their hallucinations. The family eventually moved to a large city, far from the mountains. They systematically avoided vacations in isolated places. However, sometimes, late at night, they still heard distant voices. These whispers seemed to come from the living room's turned-off radio. Emma claimed the spirits were following them, waiting for a new opportunity. The family lived in constant fear of the ancestral entity's return. They installed sophisticated security systems in their new house. Marc regularly blessed their home with holy water. Claire constantly wore a crucifix around her neck. The children avoided staying alone in darkness. One day, Emma discovered an old book in a used bookstore. The work dealt with prehistoric legends of the Alpine region. She read the story of a sanctuary guarded by ancestral spirits. According to the book, these entities attracted travelers with mirages of refuge. The victims were then sacrificed to maintain the guardian's power. Emma realized her family had barely escaped this millennial trap. She hid the book, not wanting to further traumatize her loved ones. But she continued her secret research, obsessed with the truth. She discovered that other families had lived similar experiences. Some had disappeared without leaving traces in the mountains. Others had returned traumatized, telling identical stories. Emma understood the chalet was a recurring phenomenon, appearing cyclically. The spirits reconstituted their trap each time they needed victims. She decided to document these apparitions to warn future travelers. Emma created a secret blog where she told their experience. She collected testimonies from other survivors of similar phenomena. Slowly, a network of people aware of these dangers formed. They exchanged information about places to avoid in the mountains. This secret community tried to protect the innocent. They monitored reports of mysterious chalets appearing suddenly. When possible, they discreetly warned local authorities. But officials never took these reports seriously. Emma and her allies became modern guardians against ancestral entities. They knew their mission was to protect humanity against these predators. The Moreau family had survived, but others might not have this chance. The mountain spirits continued their eternal hunt. The chalet would disappear and reappear, waiting for new occupants. This story was just an episode in a millennial saga. The ancient guardians remained patient, knowing time was on their side. Somewhere in the mountains, a warm refuge awaits the next family. The lights shine in the storm, promising safe shelter. But now, you know the truth about this ancestral trap. If you see a chalet mysteriously appearing in the snow, flee. Don't listen to the radio's voices, don't draw the symbols. Resist the temptation of this too perfect refuge. For the mountain spirits haven't given up their hunt. They wait patiently in their prehistoric sanctuary. And the next storm might be the one where you cross their path. This story ends here, but the threat remains. The ancient guardians continue to watch in the mountain's shadow. Their millennial trap remains set, waiting for the next victims. And perhaps the next family seeking refuge in the storm will discover that there are things more terrifying than cold and snow. Entities that have survived since humanity's dawn. Predators that feed on the human soul. Guardians that jealously protect their sacred territories. For in the mountains, some refuges are only traps. And some storms hide horrors older than civilization. Now that you know this truth, you can never see an isolated chalet the same way again. Every mountain refuge will carry the suspicion of this ancestral trap. And if one day you hear strange voices on a radio, remember this story. For the mountain spirits aren't done hunting. They patiently await the next winter refuge to capture new souls. This threat remains, hidden in the deceptive beauty of snowy landscapes. The ancient guardians continue their eternal vigil, and their chalet will reappear when the opportunity arises. So next time you seek refuge in a storm, remember, sometimes it's better to face the fury of the elements than the hospitality of spirits. For in the mountains, appearances can be mortally deceptive, and what looks like salvation can be your worst nightmare. The voices continue to whisper in forgotten radios. The symbols wait to be redrawn by innocent hands. And somewhere in the snowy mountains, a chalet waits. Its lights shine in the storm, promising saving refuge. But now, you know what hides behind those walls. You know the truth about this millennial trap. And perhaps this knowledge will save your life. For the ancient guardians don't like warned victims. They prefer the surprise and innocence of their prey. But you, now, you know what hides behind this welcoming facade. You know the true nature of this deceptive refuge. And this knowledge could be your salvation in the storm. For the ancient guardians count on their victims' ignorance. They exploit travelers' distress to attract them. But an informed prey is a prey that can escape the trap. So if you ever find yourself in a mountain snowstorm, remember. If a chalet suddenly appears with its warm lights, be wary. If a radio picks up strange voices in unknown languages, flee. If you discover prehistoric symbols on the walls, leave immediately. For these signs are proof you've fallen into the spirit's trap. The guardians always use the same methods to capture their prey. They create the illusion of a perfect refuge when you need it most. Then they gradually isolate you from reality. The radio becomes their first means of communication with you. The voices it broadcasts are those of the ancestral spirits. They speak directly to your subconscious, slowly hypnotizing you. That's why Emma was so fascinated by these strange sounds. Her young and impressionable mind was the ideal target for possession. Children are particularly vulnerable to spirits' influence. Their innocence makes them perfect receptacles for ancient entities. That's why guardians always target families with children. They know parents will do anything to protect their offspring. This emotional weakness becomes their most effective weapon. By taking control of a child, they ensure adults' submission. Marc and Claire were paralyzed by the fear of losing Emma. This terror made them vulnerable to the spirit's manipulations. But their family love was ultimately their strength of resistance. When they united their voices in prayer, they created a spiritual barrier. This solidarity broke the guardians' hold on their daughter. For ancestral spirits, despite their power, have a weakness. They don't understand the unconditional love that unites modern families. Their primitive society was based on survival and domination. Deep emotional bonds are foreign to them and disturb them. That's why family solidarity can break their spells. But this resistance only works if all members participate. A single weak link in the family chain is enough for the spirits. They exploit cracks in relationships to infiltrate. Disputes, grudges, and secrets become their weapons. That's why it's crucial to maintain family harmony in the mountains. Tensions between loved ones attract malevolent entities. They sense discord like predators sense weakness. If you travel as a family in isolated regions, stay united. Avoid conflicts that could make you vulnerable. For in these remote places, harmony is your best protection. The guardians constantly seek new victims. They adapt their traps to eras and technologies. In the past, they used campfires to attract travelers. Now they create modern chalets with electricity and heating. Tomorrow, they might use other more sophisticated lures. But their fundamental method remains the same: create a perfect refuge. They study their prey's needs to better seduce them. A family with children will find a family-friendly and warm chalet. Hikers will discover a well-equipped mountain refuge. Lovers will stumble upon an isolated romantic chalet. Each trap is personalized according to the targeted victims. It's this adaptation that makes the guardians so dangerous. They're not simple primitive predators. They're intelligent hunters who evolve with their era. Their millennial experience gives them considerable advantage. They know all the weaknesses of human nature. They know exactly which emotional buttons to press. That's why so few victims manage to escape them. The Moreau family had extraordinary luck. Their union in the face of danger broke the spell. But how many other families haven't had this chance? How many have disappeared in the mountains without leaving traces? Official statistics speak of accidents, avalanches, falls. But the truth is much darker and more terrifying. Many disappearances are the work of ancestral guardians. They erase all evidence of their passage. The victims' bodies nourish their underground sanctuary. Their souls join the army of imprisoned spirits. For the guardians don't kill just for pleasure. They collect souls to increase their power. Each victim becomes a servant in their dark kingdom. That's why they're so persistent in their hunt. They know each capture makes them stronger. And the stronger they are, the more elaborate traps they can create. It's a vicious circle that has lasted for millennia. The guardians gradually become more powerful. Their traps become more sophisticated and effective. And the number of victims constantly increases. That's why awareness is so important. The more people know this threat, the less they fall into the trap. The guardians lose their main advantage, surprise. They must then adapt their methods, which weakens them. For creating new traps requires a lot of energy. They prefer to use the same proven techniques. But if these techniques are known, they become ineffective. That's why Emma created her network of survivors. She knew sharing information was crucial. Each broadcast testimony potentially saves lives. The guardians hate this diffusion of their secret. They try to discredit surviving witnesses. They influence authorities to classify these reports as fantastical. But the truth always ends up emerging. Patterns emerge in the disappearances. The most perceptive investigators notice similarities. Some police begin to take these reports seriously. An underground network of aware professionals forms. They can't ACT officially, but they investigate discreetly. These unexpected allies strengthen protection against the guardians. For the more aware there are, the less power the spirits have. Collective knowledge becomes a weapon against darkness. That's why this story must be told. Each person who hears it becomes a potential guardian. Not a guardian like the ancestral spirits, but a protector of humanity against these predators. For we all have the responsibility to protect each other. The guardians count on our isolation and ignorance. They hope we remain easy prey. But together, we can break their millennial grip. Each shared story weakens their power. Each warning potentially saves lives. It's a fight we can win together. For ancestral spirits, despite their antiquity, aren't invincible. They have weaknesses we can exploit. Their millennial arrogance makes them predictable. They always use the same hunting methods. This rigidity becomes their weak point. If we know their tactics, we can avoid them. If we remain vigilant, we can foil their traps. And if we remain united, we can resist them. This is the message this story carries. It's not just a horror story to frighten. It's a vital warning to save lives. For somewhere in the mountains, a chalet waits. Its lights shine in the storm, and the guardians watch for their next victim. But now, you know. You know their methods and their weaknesses. This knowledge could save your life. Share it with your loved ones. Tell this story to those you love. For in the mountains, information is the best protection. And collective vigilance is our only defense. Against predators as ancient as humanity, who continue their eternal hunt, while patiently waiting in their sanctuary, for the next storm to bring them new prey. But you, now, you are warned. You know some refuges are traps. And some voices aren't human. This wisdom could make all the difference. Between life and death, between freedom and eternal captivity. For the guardians don't just kill. They imprison souls for eternity. It's a fate worse than death. That awaits those who fall into their trap. So remember this story. Keep it present in your mind. For it could save you one day. When you're lost in a storm, and a chalet appears as if by magic, with its welcoming lights, and its promises of warmth. Resist the temptation. Be wary of perfection. For in the mountains, nothing is ever perfect. Except the traps of ancestral guardians, who have waited patiently for millennia, for humanity to forget their lessons. But this story must not be forgotten. It must be transmitted from generation to generation. For the guardians are immortal, and their hunt will never stop. Only our collective vigilance can protect us against this ancestral threat that prowls in the snowy heights, while waiting for its next victim. But you, now, you know. And this knowledge is your greatest weapon against the guardians of the winter refuge.